Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. So, welcome to Riverbridge's first virtual fundraiser called Find Your Voice. My name is Mary Cloud. I'm the Assistant Director for Riverbridge, working primarily with fundraising, outreach in the community, grant writing, and also staff support. Now, this past year, we've had to shift and try new things, and we hope to bring a community of fundraiser that connects with Riverbridge's mission and our cause. With our selection of workshops this month, we hope to inform you, inspire you, bring out your creativity, and possibly entertain you. Now, as a nonprofit, raising funds and donations is a yearly requirement for us. We are proud to have the assistance and support of many local businesses. So please consider these places of businesses for your needs.
Ace Hardware of Carbondale is proud to serve the Roaring Fork Valley for over 20 years. Our in-house specialists are prepared to lend their expertise and experience to your next project. From hardware to backyard grilling, your neighborhood Ace is the one-stop shop to make your day easier. Helping you is our most important thing to do today. Serving the Valley for over 40 years and 3 generations strong, Roaring Fork Furniture is here to stay. Their 10,000 square foot showroom is located at 2424 South Glen Avenue, just south of Alpine Bank. Don't have time to stop by? You can tour the store from the comfort of your own home with their virtual showroom, which you'll find at roaringforkfurniture.com. They have new inventory arriving daily, so don't wait any longer to turn your house into your dream home.
If your mortgage advisor hasn't given you an annual mortgage review, then you need to listen to this message because it could potentially change your financial future. An annual mortgage review analyzes where you could save money on your mortgage and builds strategies for retirement, college savings, and future real estate investments. If you haven't had an annual review, then schedule a consultation with me today and we'll start seeing what options are available for you.
Now, with our fundraiser, we're also hoping to reach a new audience of people that are not aware of what Riverbridge is all about. So I'd like to take a few moments to educate you on the services that Riverbridge provides our community. So Riverbridge, we are a nationally accredited child advocacy center. We are one of 17 in the state of Colorado, 881 in the entire United States under the National Children's Alliance. We're a calm, neutral facility. We work with law enforcement and the Department of Human Services to assist in the investigation of child abuse allegations. All our referrals come from law enforcement or the Department of Human Services. So parents or concerned caregivers, they can't just show up at our door or call and make an appointment for any of our services. But our services such as forensic interviews, mental health therapists, our medical providers, family advocacy, it is all provided free of charge to our clients that need us. And we include Frazier. Frazier is our service dog here at our building, and he really helps calm our children's anxieties and fears when they come to interview or have mental health therapy sessions. Now, why a child advocacy center? Without a child advocacy center, children would have to be shuffled around to place in order to receive or get help. They might have to go down to the police station where there often are a lot of different people and strangers, and they have to disclose something that is very private and personal to them. So they come to our facility, which, as you see, is a house-like building. It's even a house-like building on the inside. We have couches, we have toys, everything to make sure that the child and the family are comfortable. So with the CAC, they're able to get all of their needs met. They're able to meet with the family advocate, they're able to meet with the medical or mental provider, and all of our partners, law enforcement, human services, they come to us as well in order to better collaborate and communicate on the case that is at the issue. So all of this really reduces anxiety and improves outcomes for the child and the family. Now with us is also Angie Hildebrand, and I'd like to have her explain her role within Riverbridge. Angie?
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. It's great that you have decided to learn something tonight, maybe get a little creative, and I appreciate you learning more about Riverbridge and what we do. I think nobody likes to think about childhood abuse, but I think it happens, and it's good to know that we have a really beautiful coordinated effort in order to take care of kids and teens. So I am one of two board certified pediatric forensic nurse examiners. So I've been a nurse for a long time, but I've been a forensic nurse examiner for the last 4 years. I've worked with Riverbridge since, I think it's 2018 now. So it's been a few years, but what I do is I have just special education and training that allows me to take care of kids who've been hurt by other people. So the services that we provide are, again, very child-centered. They're very individualized based on the child or teenager's needs, and can include anything from, body safety, body autonomy education, body anatomy education to an actual medical exam. What we're trying to do here is really treat the whole child. And so a lot of times just our consultations can pick up on things that may be unrelated to the abuse, but also we could provide resources on. So we are just one piece of the team at the CAC, but really happy that you all are here, and thank you for your attention and your support tonight.
Thank you, Angie. If anyone has any questions for Angie or I, you may use the chat feature to type in your question, and we'll get back to you at the end of this workshop. Now, before I introduce our workshop host, first I'd like to give a little Zoom 101. At the moment, I see all of you are muted and some of your cameras are off. This workshop may be interactive, and so you do have the ability to turn on your microphone as well as your video. You also may want to pin the host, so that way the video of the host is the main focus on your screen and not the other participants. In order to do that, you just move your cursor up to the host, Ashley Mauldin's screen, and there's 3 little dots in the upper right corner, and you can just select pin and her video will be your main focus on your screen. So now on to our main focus today. With us, we have Ashley Mauldin. Ashley is a Daring Way certified facilitator who is passionate about sharing her work of Dr. Brené Brown with the world. She is committed to creating an authentic, connected, and conscious world by helping people to live to their fullest expressions of themselves. You can learn more about the trainings provided by Ashley and her organization, Daring Women, at www.daringwomenllc.com. So thank you, Ashley, for being with us tonight, and we're excited to get started.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Mary, for offering me this opportunity. And anytime I can talk Brené for like an hour is awesome for me. So I get to nerd out. And if you are a Brené fan, you get to nerd out as well. So yeah, I thought it would be appropriate for me to share my story about how I got connected to this work, because this workshop is really about owning our story. So my story about connecting to Brené's work really starts in 2011. I ended up moving to the Roaring Fork Valley then, and I was going through a really big time of tumultuous change with myself. I basically decided to do every life change you could think of in about a 6-month span, which, by the way, don't do if you can help it, because it's pretty awful. But I ended up having a baby. I moved. I started a new business. I moved into a house. My baby had health issues. And to top it all off, I had really bad postpartum depression. So I was in deep struggle. I had so much going on. I was feeling so overwhelmed, and I was living in a new place where I really didn't know anybody and have a connected network to support me during that time. I absolutely know if I would have had a tribe of strong women to hold me up, to listen to me, to reassure me that I was okay and there wasn't anything wrong with me, that time period would have been a lot different for me. Unfortunately, that was not the case. And when you're a therapist, especially in a new area, networking events is not the place that you're going to have that conversation, right? Hey, I'm a therapist new to the Valley and I'm super depressed. So it was really hard for me to be open, to be authentic, and to own my story at that time. Over the years between then and the time I started Daring Women, I met so many people who had similar stories, that came to this valley, that felt really alone, that felt really disconnected, and didn't have somebody to turn to when they were in struggle. There were enough people like that. I'm like, I have to do something about this. This isn't right. And I am still disconnected and wanting to meet some really awesome, authentic people. And so I created Daring Women in 2018 for that very reason. I wanted to meet people who were interested in the same things that I was, who were interested in being real and being authentic and not putting on the mask that we so often put on. And that's exactly who has shown up for this group. And some of you I know from Daring Women, so that's kind of cool too. So you probably heard me tell this story before, but connection is so near and dear to my heart. And when we can show up, be seen, and live brave of like being who we truly are, it's a game changer. So that's what I want to go over with all of you tonight, is the Rising Strong process with Brené Brown, because really the Rising Strong process is a process of us learning to own our stories. And so I'm going to take you through, and I'm going to screen share. I'm not very good at multitasking, so I'll try to talk and pull up my presentation at the same time. Here we go. We'll play that. Okay, everybody can see that, right? Okay, awesome. So I'm really going to take you through this Rising Strong process. And again, I want to talk about storytelling. So if we look at a story, almost all stories have the same 3 parts to them, the same 3 acts to a story. So we're going to go over what those acts are, what they are in the Rising Strong process, and how that's going to help all of you transform your struggle into something great. Before we do that though, I actually kind of skipped ahead here. I want to take a minute, since it's a smaller group tonight, and let's take a moment, introduce ourselves, and something that you would like to get out of tonight, or the reason that you came here in the first place. So I'm going to pick on my mom because she's here. And she's under the name of Fishy, but that's not her name. So
This is not my name. My name is Kim, and I am Ashley's mom. And well, I have a couple goals of getting out that I would like to see this evening. And one is to watch my daughter in action. And I enjoy listening to her insight into things. And I do really enjoy a lot of the works of Brené Brown, and haven't participated in any of her previous workshops or work that she's done around that. So I'm hoping to learn some new things this evening.
all right, thanks for letting me pick on you. All right, who else would like to share of who they are and why they're here tonight? All right, Amy.
I'm alphabetically in the front here, so I thought I would go.
Perfect.
Just pure curiosity. I don't know anything about Brené Brown, although the name sounds really familiar to me. So I wonder if something's going to click when you start talking about her. But just pure curiosity. I'm interested in learning new things. So thank you for being here and contributing to Riverbridge, and I'm all ears and head. Heart.
Sweet. Awesome. Thank you, Amy. Who else wants to introduce themselves and give us a little insight into why you're here, what you'd like to get out of being here?
I can go. I am Kayla, and I love Brené Brown. And so for me, it's just kind of continuing the process and getting to know kind of the next step in her series. So I'm just excited to kind of get an introduction to that.
Awesome. Thanks, Kayla. Thanks for being here. I know Kayla as well. So. And I know you too, Sammy, even though I can't see you. So I don't know if you would like to go next.
Sorry, had to find the unmute button. Cursor was in the wrong place. My name is Sammy, and I am also a big fan of Brené Brown. And I've read The Gifts and Braving the Wilderness. And so I was kind of interested to learn a little bit more about the Rising Strong process. I'm always kind of curious. I haven't read Rising Strong or Dare to Lead. So I was just kind of curious to hear about one of the other kind of processes that she that she talks about. And I'm also a fan of Riverbridge and Mary. So I just, looking forward to it.
Awesome. All right, Lauren, to share a little bit about what brought you here.
Can you hear me?
There you go. Yep, no, we can hear you.
I'm a fan of Riverbridge as well, and have met Ashley. And I'm sort of a recent convert to Brené Brown. I have started listening to some of her podcasts, and they're pretty fun. Honestly, I wasn't really sure what this was going to involve, and I had no idea that it involved Brené Brown. So I'm mainly here from a curiosity standpoint.
Awesome. Good to see you, Lauren.
Thanks.
And Blythe, you're involved in Riverbridge. I don't know if you want to introduce yourself.
Sure. I'm Blythe Chapman. Hi, Lauren. Good to see you. I'm the executive director at Riverbridge, and I'm here to support Mary and everything that she's doing. But also, Ashley, I've been kind of hearing about and seeing what you're doing, social media and emails and whatnot, and always been kind of interested. So I'm really excited to learn more.
Yeah, I'm glad you can pop in on it for sure. Awesome. Well, we'll get started now, but I was like, oh, I should introduce each other first. Okay, so I'll share my screen again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through the different stages of the storytelling process. And then we're going to see how that works in terms of Brené's research that she has conducted. So let me get back to my slides here. So if we look at a story, where I left off at, a story always has 3 acts to it. So any show we're watching, any movie we're watching, it's going to follow the same pattern. It's also the same pattern that it happens in our own lives. So act 1 is where a problem occurs. Act 2 is where the character does everything they can possibly think of doing to solve that problem without being vulnerable. There's a moment in that where they realize, whew, I have tried and tried and tried and tried, and I guess I have to do this the hard way. I have to do something vulnerable. I have to do something courageous. Everything that happened to us last year, and maybe still into this year, is in Act 2, right? Like a problem occurs, this pandemic happens, and we try to do everything we can to solve it and figure it out. And it ends up requiring a lot of courage and vulnerability, right? So we were all in a collective Act 2 last year, which was really rough. So hopefully some of us are moving more into Act 3, where the character has new learnings and insight from their struggle. I wanted to take just a minute to walk through this with a story hopefully all of you are familiar with, which is The Wizard of Oz. If you haven't seen The Wizard of Oz, you should probably watch it. So, but hopefully if everybody has seen this. So who wants to tell me what happens at the beginning? What's the problem that occurs in Act 1 in The Wizard of Oz? And just unmute yourself and shout it out or write it in the chat if you want.
There's a tornado.
Yep. Tornado picks up the house, boom, lands it in Oz. And then we move into Act 2. Act 2, what's Dorothy's initial solution to get back home? It's to go to see the wizard, right? She has to go take the yellow brick road. She meets some people along the way. She thinks, okay, I can just ask the wizard and I'll get to go home. Well, that's not the case, right? She goes to see the wizard. He's like, no, you need to go get this broomstick from the Wicked Witch of the West. Obviously, that involves a great deal of vulnerability and courage, and she does it. And then we start to move in a bit into Act 3, and there's an insight and learning in order for her to go home. She learns from Glinda the Good Witch that she's had the power all along. She has to click her heels together 3 times, and when she returns home, she has a newfound appreciation for all of the people that are in her life that maybe she took for granted before, right? And so we have these key things that happen along this process to get her to where she ends up at the end. Does that make sense to everybody? Any questions, any thoughts? We all good? Okay. Anytime you have thoughts, questions, I want this to be interactive. I don't want anyone to feel like they leave here being super confused. So please let me know. The Rising Strong process strongly mimics the storytelling Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. Instead of calling it that, we call it the reckoning, the rumble, and the revolution. So the reckoning is where we're really walking into our stories. We're recognizing our emotions and getting curious about our feelings and how they connect to how we think about what's going on and how we behave. The rumble is where we really dive in and own our story. We get clear about the story that we're telling ourselves and challenge ourselves. Hey, is this story actually true? Or am I making up part of it? If we're not clear on the story we're telling ourselves, if we can't get more connected to the truth of what's happening, there's no way we can own our story. So that's a really, really important part of the process. And once we've walked through our story, we've owned our story, then the process becomes practice. And that's what the revolution represents. Once you start doing this Rising Strong process, it's really hard to not keep doing it because the results that you get and in the places it takes you are pretty amazing. So it's hard work, but having done it myself for years now, there's no other way that I approach my problems. And none of this is easy or simple necessarily, but it's absolutely worth it. So I want to start with Act 1, which is the reckoning. This is recognizing and reckoning with our emotions. One thing I've noticed as a therapist and just as a person living in the world is people are not very good with their emotional vocabulary. They have a hard time recognizing what's coming up for them, labeling it. And if you ask most people, they probably only know about 5 emotions. That really limits us in terms of knowing what we're experiencing. If we can't name it, we can't tame it, right? We have to know what's going on for us. So one thing you all can do starting today is start to broaden that emotional vocabulary. And I'm so lucky I have a job where that's almost required of me, but for most of us, it's not. And it's just now starting to be something that's taught more in school of how do we recognize emotions and how do we label them in order to communicate them and to get our needs met, because we can't do that unless this is happening. So we need to identify what we are feeling and when we're emotionally hooked. We also need to be aware when we get emotionally hooked of how we might offload our emotions. And I'm going to go over the strategies I see most commonly for offloading emotions, because that's a big red flag for us to get curious about what's coming up for us. And you'll see that word at the bottom too. Curiosity is one of the biggest words you can take out of this act, out of the reckoning, is getting curious. So let's get curious, right? Emotional offloading strategies. I put this first because everybody I've ever met does this. We numb. We are a society that doesn't like to feel, and so we check out. We numb. A common ones: alcohol, food. Who's been binge watched a season of something, or like a whole 5 seasons of something in a weekend? One thing for me, I know, is I'll find myself on Facebook or social media in my pantry eating some sort of junk food. And that's a really good time for me to say, hey, what's going on, Ashley? You might be feeling a little bit stressed. We can use drugs, sex. Working too much can also be something that pops up that people don't always recognize as a numbing strategy, but it absolutely is. Basically, anything that we do to avoid pain or emotions can fit into this category. And again, one glass of wine could be a nice treat at the end of the day, whereas a bottle of wine could be numbing. If you do that, that doesn't always make you an addict either. And I think that really confuses people of like, okay, what's the difference between numbing and addiction? Addiction can be extreme numbing, but we can numb without being addicted. Does that make sense? Okay. Chandeliering. So this is where you go 0 to 60. You are on the floor and then you're on the roof. That's why they call it chandeliering. You are up in the chandelier. So this is a seemingly innocent comment that might send somebody into a rage or a crying fit. I don't know who here has made like a really dumb, small mistake. And if you're on edge, you just lose it on yourself. You like do this self-berating, like, God, I'm so stupid. I can't, so that could happen if we're already in an emotionally vulnerable or difficult place. Who was here during all the bridge work in Glenwood Springs? Did any of you experience that lovely thing? So if you didn't, it was I'm in Newcastle. It took about 2 hours to get into town and about 2 hours to get out of town every day for, I think, about 3 months. So you could see people obviously getting frustrated and upset and having a hard time with that. But then there were people who were pretty much getting out of their cars ready to beat somebody up. And so that's what we're going to see more with this chandeliering. It's like this rage comes over and it's a lot more uncontrollable. Bouncing hurt is another strategy. This is where we try to blow it off. You know what? I don't give a damn. I don't care what they think. That's fine. It doesn't matter. When it actually does matter to us, it could also look like blaming others, fault finding, making excuses. And I find this image to be extremely powerful because how many times have we said that I'm fine when we're not fine? And we actually had a term for what fine actually meant at a treatment center I worked at. It was effed up, insecure, neurotic, and emotional. So if somebody said they were fine, it was like, that's not the word that that actually means something else. So I kind of joke about that. But that actually, when somebody says they're fine, it's almost a flag for me now to check in and go a little bit deeper, because usually they're not. And that's not always the case. Some people actually are fine, but just something to think about. Stockpiling. This is similar to chandeliering and can lead to chandeliering, because what we're doing is we're stuffing. So we're pushing it down, we're pushing it down, we're pushing it down until we can't anymore, and our bodies cannot take it. So this can show up a lot somatically in terms of having headaches, stomach issues, tension, physical anxiety, depression. There's actually a book called this. It's a fantastic book. The Body Keeps the Score. And it's so true. It's true with our trauma. It's true with our day-to-day stuff. And I remember for me going through grad school and even undergrad, I would always get sick after finals week. And I think finals week is so stressful, and we're so worried, and we're staying up, and we're not taking care of ourselves. And it's like, again, you're just shoving it down, and the inevitable is going to happen where your body's like, you got to slow it down, right? I think we've probably all gotten sick at least once from being super stressed out and not taking great care of ourselves. High centering. I don't know if anyone else has high centered their car. It really sucks. I've only done it on snow. I haven't been like this Jeep is, thank goodness, because that looks really hard to figure out. But this can happen to us emotionally. This is where we get stuck. We feel like, okay, I've come so far, and now I feel like I can't move forward, and I can't move back. The fear moving forward is that if I dive into my emotional wound or my trauma, I'm not going to be able to handle the floodgate of emotions that's going to happen. I'm going to lose it, right? By the way, I've yet to see that happen to somebody in therapy, but it's this really common feeling for people when they start to engage in therapy. So we're opening some things up, we're starting to make a little bit of progress, but then it's like, whoa, I don't know if I want to go there, right? But I've seen too much to go back to where I was before. Any questions so far? Let me see if I don't know if I can see everybody, but just chime in if you do have a question as we go along, or type it in the chat. The Umbridge is the last one that we'll go over for the offloading strategies. And I will admit to all of you that I did not know who this was at first, because I don't watch or read Harry Potter. So if you hate me for that, so be it. But my husband's into it. I never really got into it. But Dolores Umbridge is a character in Harry Potter. And as you can see from this picture of her, she dresses in pink. She has her pillbox hat. She has her little tea saucer. So she looks like she might be very nice, but maybe you can tell from the smirk on her face that she is not. In fact, in the movie or the book, she apparently tortures children. So I'm not good at referencing that because I don't totally understand the context, but this is where the light and the dark are not integrated. And so we could become overly sweet and accommodating when really we feel resentful, hurt, or frustrated. We might say yes to something when we really mean no, and our niceness is inauthentic. An example I have of when I've done this in the past, I used to work at a smoothie shop in college, and they would serve wheatgrass and veggie drinks. And these wheatgrass machines and veggie machines took so long to clean. And so we would, if we weren't busy at night, we would clean them all before closing so we could get off early. Well, inevitably, every once in a while, we'd get somebody coming in, sometimes 2 or 3 minutes before we were going to close. And sure enough, they would get a veggie drink and a wheatgrass. And it was like, no, I wanted to go hang out with my friends. It's Friday night. And so, in customer service, you can't be rude to the customer. So there's this like, oh, hi, cool. Well, yeah, we'll have that right up for you. And it was really like, oh my God, I can't believe you came in and did that. They didn't know. But I think there's moments where we all do that. And it's not necessarily appropriate for me in that situation to express my frustration. But we want to pay attention when we do this, especially on larger scales and with people we're closer with, because that's really going to cause some issues if we're not addressing them. So before we move on from the offloading strategies, I'd love for each of you in the chat maybe to identify what seems to be one of your offloading strategies. If you're not comfortable sharing that, that's okay. But I really want to challenge each of you as we go along to start to identify pieces of yourself, or maybe people that are close to you, of what their tendencies might be when they're in struggle, when they're in stress, when they're not dealing with their emotions. So, and I'm going to take a second because I can't see the chat when I'm sharing. So I'm going to stop the share so I can see what you all are saying. Okay. Let's see. So Valerie says numbing. Mary says high centering. So going in circles, can't get out of the roundabout for sure. All of them. Yes, Sammy, I can see myself at every single one of these. I could come up with a personal example of when I've done that. So numbing, yep, from Amy. All of them, numbing, stockpiling, high centering, been in all of them. I'm good at stockpiling. Yeah. And it's good to know about ourselves. It's good to know about our partners because we might have different strategies. So when we notice those, because it'd be nice if we could just skip over those, right? But I haven't found that to be the case. But when we notice that we're doing that, or we're about to do that, that's the time that we want to start to get more curious about, hey, what's going on for me? What emotions are going on? What am I maybe avoiding right now? And sometimes I'm like, I'm avoiding writing my notes and I'm going to do it. Like sometimes I just do it anyway. So at least you get to decide, and that feels a lot more empowering than just letting it happen. So what do we do with this? We've identified it. We're curious about it. We know it. What do we do with it? Don't be mad at me for this next screen because it's stuff you probably all heard before. But I will say common sense does not necessarily equate to common practice. So here we go. We have mindfulness, breathing, and some of you may not have heard of this, but there's a concept of permission that I wanted to talk about. So mindfulness does not have to be a formalized practice like you see here. You don't have to get a mat out. You don't have to do any fancy moves or sit a certain way. You absolutely can. You can have a formalized meditation practice you do, something like that. That's awesome if you can do that. We don't all have the luxury to do that, or maybe meditation just really doesn't work for you. So the best definition I've heard of mindfulness simply is paying attention. What am I noticing right here, right now? You can practice this literally right here, right now. What's the temperature of the room? How am I sitting? How do I feel in my body? What's it like to hear my voice? Maybe it's soothing and nice, or maybe you're like, oh my gosh, that's really irritating. I don't care either way, but like getting curious about it, right? Like what's coming up for me right here, right now? You could be driving somewhere to pick up your kids, or maybe they're already in the car. Just trying to notice those things, get a little bit more grounded in what's right in front of you. That'll allow our bodies to calm down typically, because a lot of times where our stress is coming from is either from the past or the future. It's not actually what's happening right in front of us. Not always the case, but many times is the case. The other thing we want to think about is breathing. That is the easiest way we can start to regulate our body, our nervous system, when we're getting emotionally hooked. For most people, emotionally hooked is going to look more like a hyper aroused state. So a fight or flight state. Our blood pressure is going to be up. Our stress hormones are going to get released. We're going to feel tension in our body. Our breath might start to go more rapidly. So we got to breathe. And connecting to that can be really helpful. If we're super escalated, it's going to be hard to use any of these. So I'll just say that too. So the sooner you can notice you're getting emotionally hooked, or the sooner you just regularly put these things into practice, the more success you're going to have. If you're in a total rage, are you going to sit there and like okay, I'm going to meditate and breathe? Probably not. So don't beat yourself up if you can't use them in those really intense moments, but try to practice them. If we practice them, we're going to have a neural pathway that says, oh yeah, that's right, I can do this thing. And you're going to have more practice at it. That pathway is going to get stronger the more you practice it. The last concept here is something that Brené does a ton in her life, a ton at her workplace. And it's this idea of permission. So before we go and start a work meeting, for example, what permission might we need to give ourselves to fully show up in that meeting? Is it just to speak up when we feel intimidated and share our thought anyway? Is it to just listen? I mean, it could be the very opposite of that. My permission before I do these is that it's okay to mess up, and it's okay to not know something. I wish I knew everything and had the answers for everybody, but I don't. And so those are my permissions. I remind myself it's okay to make a mistake and have an imperfect talk. So that's something to think about as well when you're in struggle and when you're doing this work. So has anybody heard of the concept of permission slips before? I know Kayla has and Valerie too, because they've done some of my workshops. So awesome. So we'll continue with that, but those are just some strategies of what to do when we're noticing those emotions. Now we're moving into Act 2. So this is fun time. So get ready to rumble, or whatever they say at the sporting events. So Act 2, this is where we're really diving into our story. We need to understand our story, because if we don't, there's absolutely no way we could write the ending. And if we're not paying attention to it, the ending writes itself, and it's usually not the ending that we wanted. So it's about identifying the story and then getting intentional about things. We're going to go over some common rumble topics, and basically what that means are common themes and threads that come up when we are looking at our stories. So big rumble topics include shame, trust, and vulnerability. There's other rumble topics as well, but this is a shorter workshop, so we're not going to go over those. And once we identify that we're in shame, or that we're telling a story about something, then we have the opportunity to live big, which is an acronym that I'm going to teach you, and that will really help you to show up better in tough situations. And I come back to it all the time. I absolutely love it. So let's get started. First things first, I absolutely love the concept of this, and I use it all the time. So SFD is shitty first draft. Hopefully it's okay that goes here. I did not come up with that, but that's what it's called. If you're working with kids, it's called a stormy first draft. But these are the first thoughts that come to our mind when we're emotionally hooked, and they're not typically real awesome. Oftentimes when we're making up a story, it's because we have an absence of data. And when we have an absence of data, we pretty much always make up a story. In fact, our brains release dopamine, which is a feel-good reward chemical when we create a story. The problem is we get that feel-good chemical, we get that dopamine hit, whether or not the story is true. And I don't know about you, but I saw this all the time last year. I'm still seeing it, where we have limited data points, and people make up, they fill in the gaps between those data points. And what we have then is a conspiracy. So there are data points in a conspiracy. There are nuggets of truth in a conspiracy, but the rest of it's made up and has no basis in fact that we know of. And so this often leads us to engage in what we call a confabulation. And I had never heard this term before I did Brené's work, but I think it's a great term. It's a lie told honestly. So if I'm working at an office and I walk by one of my coworkers and they make this kind of weird face at me, and by the time I've gotten to my office, I've probably made up a story about what that means. And if I was engaging in a confabulation, I might call up my husband or my friend or another coworker and be like, do you know what? I saw Judy walking down the hall and she gave me this weird look. And I think she thinks I'm a total loser. And ever since we had that meeting, she's, we create this whole thing, and our friend or our like spouse or family member might be like, yeah, that Judy. And like all of a sudden we created this whole thing. And maybe Judy just had to sneeze, right? Like maybe she was like, got some allergies going on, and we created this whole thing. So it's really important for us to recognize what we're telling ourselves, and then try to, if we don't have all the information, try to get some more information before we really commit to what the story is. So any thoughts on SFDs? So what I would recommend doing with an SFD, if you notice that you're emotionally hooked, write that stuff down. And SFDs should be raw. They should be unfiltered. They like, and I tell people this, and my mom's here, so she can vouch. I would never even send my mom my SFD because she'd be like, whoa, like, although I might have shared pieces of a couple of them with you, but the things I say in there they're not nice. They're not what you think your therapist would be saying. Since I'm a therapist, but that happens, right? Like the things that go through our head are intense, and getting them out on paper and looking at them and dissecting them is so, so important. Once we've calmed down, we can come back through the SFD and look at like, what do I know for sure? What are the actual facts in this situation? And then we'll move into the living big model, which I'll talk about later. So that's something else you can apply to the SFD. So questions, thoughts about SFDs, about stories, anything like that? No? We're good? Sweet. Shame. So shame is super important to understand while we're rumbling with something, because shame is so highly correlated with many, many, many negative things. I would say almost everything that I deal with as a therapist is correlated with shame. So we have addiction, depression, eating disorders, domestic violence, suicide, shame. And I know a lot of the kids that end up at Riverbridge, they've experienced shame too, right? And it's very bad for us. And shame is a sense that I am bad. There's something wrong with me. Whereas guilt is I did something bad. There's a focus on self when we're talking about shame. There's a focus on behavior when we're talking about guilt. And guilt is actually inversely correlated with all those things, because it gives us something we can do and we can change. So if I'm late picking up my kids, I have an option to deal with myself with a sense of shame or a sense of guilt. A sense of shame would say, I'm such a bad mom. I'm such a piece of crap. I can't believe I did that. If people knew, they would think I was a terrible mom too. That might be the self-talk of somebody who's in shame. Whereas guilt would say something like, oh man, I like have really poor planning with this, and that wasn't okay. And I need to make sure I'm there on time for the kids. Very different self-talk, right? So we need to identify when we're in shame. And I think everybody on here is female. I think in particular for women, we're like notorious for just shaming the crap out of ourselves all the time. We are so hard on ourselves, and many of us have had to really try to overcome perfectionistic tendencies, and all of that's wrapped up into shame. So any questions about the difference between shame and guilt? Are we clear on that? Cool.
Ashley, so with shame, is it like shame versus guilt? Guilt, obviously you can overcome. Shame is something that it'll take a lot harder to work through in order to change it.
Well, you have to identify first that it is shame, and that you want to let go of that and move through it. With shame, we feel like we can't fix anything because we are just inherently bad or broken. And so I think that's a huge part of the healing process of like going to therapy or telling somebody what's been going on for us, and having them not shame us. They found in the research, and I don't really go over it in this particular presentation, but they found in the research that empathy and self-compassion are two of the most important elements for us in terms of shame resilience and overcoming shame. And so we need to learn how to be compassionate to ourselves, be nice to ourselves, because that's going to start to break that process of us shaming ourselves. And we need to find somebody who can hold space and empathy for us, whether that's a therapist, a friend, a coworker, just some safe person that can be there for us while we're in our struggle. But yeah, it's much harder to work through, and the longer we've reinforced it for, the harder it is to undo. So if I felt from age 10 that I wasn't good enough, and now I'm 45, I'm just making up numbers, that's going to be a lot harder for me to unwire. Versus, okay, I brought up my example of having postpartum depression. I felt so much shame having postpartum depression because everybody else was posting, oh, I just love my baby, that this is the best. I feel so in love. It's, and I'm so happy that I felt that way, but I absolutely did not feel that way. And there was so much shame in that. It's like, wow, what's wrong with me? I'm really messed up. Like, and I don't want to tell anybody that, because what are they going to think when I'm like, oh, I kind of wish like I didn't have them because I'm so overwhelmed and I don't know what to do. And I am so depressed, like I can't even function. Hopefully that kind of helps. But it took me years to even admit how bad that felt and some of the thoughts that I had around it. And lots of therapy to undo the, like, I'm not a good mom, I'm not good enough thing. And it still pops up every once in a while. So it's not like everything's perfect and you're fine forever. But because if you do the work, you can get, if it does pop up for me now and again, I can work through it pretty fast. And that's a great question. Any other questions about shame? I could do a whole talk on shame. There's a lot of stuff on shame. So you could always look up Brené Brown and shame and find about 1 billion things on there. Along with shame is vulnerability. So uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. So those were the exact reasons I didn't want to share, right? I didn't know how people were going to respond. It was really risky for me as a therapist. And I would have felt really extremely emotionally exposed. So that, that's why we don't do it sometimes. That's why we play small. And her work is a lot about leaning into vulnerability, to taking more leaps and risks and, when appropriate. I mean, there's times where we shouldn't do that, but, in this picture, I think, sending our kids off to school with the mask on, like that felt really vulnerable for me in the fall, and just not knowing what was going to happen or if that was the right decision. So we've all experienced that. And sometimes it's a choice, and sometimes it's something like we just are forced to do. Like nobody signed up for COVID-19 as far as I'm aware. And so, we were thrust into this vulnerable situation. So vulnerability is really funny. So it's paradoxical in that, like, me sharing my story, people will be like, oh, you're so courageous. You're so this, that, and other thing. But it's the last thing people often want to do when they meet somebody. They're like, ooh, I'm not going to tell them anything. I'm not going to let them know how I actually am. I'm not going to let them know what bothers me. But that's actually what we look for in other people in order to connect with them. So it's really weird like that. There's so many myths that go along with vulnerability. And I would love to hear from all of you. And maybe we can do this in the chat. Like, when you think of vulnerability, what comes up for you? Like, what are some of your thoughts about vulnerability? When you were raised, what did you think about vulnerability? Like, what were you taught? So I'm going to stop my share so I can see what y'all are saying. Weakness. Yep. And I don't think for better or worse, and I know my mom's on here, but like, I don't think we talked about it. Like, I don't think it was really even a term that was used. But I'm sure if it was, it would have been equated with weakness just in the general culture. Yeah. So I'm not even sure I knew what it was. And then if I do hear it, it's like, I don't want to be vulnerable. Like, I want to be safe. I want to be secure. I'm a recovering control freak. So I like to be in control and be able to predict what's going to happen. And that's just not how life was or is, right? So the one other thing that I commonly hear people mistake about vulnerability is that they believe it's oversharing. So we have to be careful when we're being vulnerable to not overshare. I'm so guilty of being an oversharer. And when we overshare, we're looking for connection, but we're trying to hotwire it. So if I'm in an elevator with you and I just told you all the things about my postpartum depression and you've never met me before, you might be like, whoa, deer in the headlights, right? And that's not really what we're going for when we're looking for connection. So we want to share with people that have earned the right to hear our stories. We also want to share, like if I'm sharing in a very public platform, but I've done a lot of work to get where I am today. No way would I have shared on this kind of level when I was in the middle of it. So I've already written that story. I've already moved through it. I feel pretty solid in it now, and I'm willing to own that. I'm not going to share with you like what I'm going through right now and what those personal struggles are, because that's just, it's too much. And we also have to think, and this has been coming up more for me, the older my kids get, because sometimes I'll use them as examples when I'm sharing about myself. Some of their story isn't necessarily mine to tell. So I've also tried to be very clear on how I'm incorporating other people into my story and how that might impact them, because I want to be conscientious of that. I like what Brené says. Vulnerability is not live tweeting your bikini wax. So nobody live tweet their bikini wax. That is not what we're doing. Vulnerability is not sharing the details of your divorce and your kid's emotional response to that on Facebook. That's oversharing. So sometimes it's a bit of a fine line, but I hope that makes sense. If like we can be real, we can be open, but we need to also not go in a little too deep, too far. We have to build some trust, and that takes a little bit of time. But it's all paradoxical, because in order to build trust, we have to be a little vulnerable too. But again, I would ask you to try something out, share a little bit more about yourself than you normally would, see how that person or that group responds. And then if you're comfortable, you can continue sharing more and connecting that way. Does that make sense? Everybody good on that part? Okay. So back to the presentation. Okay. So those are the big pieces. There's a lot more on vulnerability, but again, I'm going through just the highlights of this work. This is one of my favorite questions to ask people when I'm doing this presentation. And this is, do you believe that people are doing the best they can? Why or why not? So you can type that in the comments, and then we can talk about it. So Valerie says yes. Amy says yes, almost always. And maybe it'll help too. I want you to also think about somebody who drives you crazy. Like just gets under your skin. And it could be somebody you're close to. Maybe it's a politician, because that's been pretty dicey the last however many years. Somebody that just, ugh. Do you think they're doing the best that they can? Right. So most of you said yes. sometimes I get a bit critical. I definitely do at times too. You know, I think people can always do better. Yep. And it's interesting. So when they did the research on this, the type of research that Brené does is something called qualitative research. So it's a bit different in that they look to be able to predict the participants' responses. And so they get to what's called saturation with something when they can predict the responses. So they actually got to saturation with this question really quickly, because it was one of two camps, right? Like, and she said people tended to respond really strongly if they were in the no, they're not camp. They're like, hell no way they're gonna, you know, they could always do better. They're not trying hard enough. And it was like this very like strong like response to it. And then there was this other camp that's like a little bit more quiet, a little bit more contemplative. And they're like, you know, maybe it's naive of me, but I do believe people are doing the best they can. And Blythe, it's exactly what you're saying there. So you said, I think people can always do better, including myself. Those of us that get like that with other people, we're so hard on ourselves, and we're always very aware of where we could be doing better, or we have a list of shoulds that we should be better at or do more of. And we put those onto other people as well, because we're like very aware of what they could do to improve their situation or whatever it is, even if they're not. And that doesn't clearly always go over well in relationships, right? So what the research also found is that people who believe that somebody is doing the best that they can then has to grapple with a whole host of emotions that come up. Because if somebody's doing the best they can, that might mean a lot of grief coming up for a certain relationship. Perhaps that person's never going to show up how we want them to show up. Maybe that supervisor is never going to treat us with the respect that we hope they will. And then we are tasked with, what do we want to do with that? So what does that mean for us? And that's where we're going to get into this acronym of living big. So I'm going to pull that up so you all can see it. Living big. Okay, there we go. So living big. I love this acronym. It's easy to remember, hard to implement. So living big is where we have to think about what boundaries do I need to put in place so I can work from the place of most integrity for me and extend the most generous assumption that I can about the other person. So boundaries, integrity, generosity. What boundaries do I need to put in place to stay within my integrity while giving the other person the most generous assumption that I can? And I have a very love-hate relationship with boundaries. They're great after you set them. They're really uncomfortable and awkward sometimes when we are setting them. And how Brené defines boundaries is being clear about what's okay and what's not okay. So that actually increases trust in a relationship when we can be clear about that. It also decreases resentment. So if we're not setting a boundary and this person continues to act that same way, we've never even given them the opportunity to show up differently with us. If we set a boundary and they continue to violate it, again, we're tasked with what further boundaries do I need to set to keep myself in my integrity, to protect myself and still give that person a generous assumption. So somebody could be doing the best they could, and we might come to the conclusion that that's not going to work for us. We might have an employee that's doing the best that they can, and we know they're, maybe they're struggling with something, but they're not showing up. They're not turning in their work. We've asked them numerous times. We set those boundaries and they continue to violate them. Sometimes this stuff gets really serious and really hard to do. So it's compassion, it's understanding, but also saying what's okay and what's not okay for us. And that really is truly living into our authenticity. So I know for myself, I've had to set some of those around political conversations with people because that's gotten really nasty. And I know people are good deep down. I really do. I think people are doing the best they can, and they might have different opinions, but there are things and ways people are acting as a result of that kind of strife that just isn't okay. And so we have to call that out into the world. We have to let people know what our expectations are and figure out what we're going to do if they don't uphold those. So that's a lot. So I'm wondering if any of you have thoughts or questions, or feel like, man, I don't know how to apply this, because I'd be happy to help walk through something.
This is Sammy. I just put it in the chat, but you know, I said, you know, that can be very challenging, especially in work situations when you might not have the ability to set such boundaries, and you know, especially if it's a supervisor, but even with coworkers and things like that, where you don't have the ability to, you know, say the things that, you know, you might say if it was someone else. You know, you might have more of that freedom to say, you know, the things that you feel like should be said, but can't necessarily be said, or set boundaries that, you know, think should be in place.
For sure. And there'll be all kinds of situations in our life where we have that power differential with somebody, and we're not able to set those boundaries or to speak in that way. I would also think about, okay, if that's happening for me, maybe that work context isn't very conducive to who I really am and how I really want to show up, or isn't in line with my values. And I don't know if that's true or not. Those are some questions that would pop up for me of really, can I thrive and be the person I want to be, and feel supported and cared about in that environment? I think that sounds like it'd be a bit challenging to do. So, and then again, then we're at a crossroads, because maybe that is the job for you, or maybe you've committed to doing it for a while, or maybe there's enough good pieces that you want to stay. So it's pretty complex to fully unpack here, but that's a great point you brought up. And there may still be ways to set some boundaries. And I'm happy, since I know you too, if you want to call me later, we can chat a little bit about specifics. Sound good?
Ashley?
Uh-huh.
So when you set the boundary and someone violates it, what's the first move? A conversation?
There's a few factors that I think about. First of all, I tend to be more open to having a number of conversations with somebody if it's somebody I'm really close with and it's really important for me to preserve that relationship. I also look at the other party too, in terms of, you know, are they capable of having this conversation? Are they capable of hearing what I'm saying, and following through with that? And because sometimes people just aren't in a place where they can do that. And so sometimes the boundary isn't necessarily a spoken one, but it could be a boundary around how much time you spend with somebody. It could be a boundary about what conversations are okay and what's not okay. Those sorts of things. Sometimes if it repeats and repeats and repeats, it gives us information about that relationship. And there might be an element that you'll have to rumble with, of grief, of disappointment, of sadness, that maybe the relationship can't quite be how you would hoped it would be. Does that answer your question?
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah. And that's what makes this work really hard. Because I always tell people, when we're vulnerable, at least for me, it's always given me the answer that I need. Sometimes that answer is not what I want, and it can be extremely painful. I would say more often than not, it gives me good things, a connection and all that happy stuff. But sometimes it's like, wow, I might not be able to be as close to this person as I thought I could be. I might have to let go of some dreams that I had for a future or what I thought things would look like, or grieve how things used to be. And all that, it's good work, but it's hard and it sucks. So I don't know if that's the answer you wanted, but that'll be the answer I give you. And just because we have these nice acronyms, like sometimes this stuff takes months and years to really go through and integrate and implement, and you have to repeat it. It's not like it's more of a rough direction point versus like a really detailed GPS map. It's like you're still kind of stumbling around finding your way, but you have some general direction of how to do that. So any other questions about this? I know this is simple, not easy to do. So, and we can practice this pretty regularly. And just getting clear on like, what is okay for me? What is not okay for me? Integrity also requires that we get curious about what are my values? Am I living into my values? Am I living into my integrity? Am I showing up in this same relationship in a way that makes me feel okay? And again, bringing that generosity that usually helps soften whatever boundaries we're setting, where we can say, hey, I think this is what's going on for you, or I know this has been really hard for you, or I don't think you meant it this way, but you know, I always want people to give me a generous assumption. So, you know, we want to treat people like we want to be treated. And I want to know if I'm bugging somebody. So I think boundary setting is actually a really great thing. Like if I'm bugging somebody, or if I've been doing something or dropping the ball and maybe I'm not aware of it, I know I want to know. It might be hard for me to hear initially, but I absolutely want to know, especially in those close relationships. So, so that's something to think about with that. So we kind of started to talk about this, and when you do a deep dive in the Rising Strong process, we go way more into depth with all of these topics. We have a workbook that we go through, videos that we watch, discussions that we have. We share a lot more. I know I have a couple participants that did my Daring Greatly workshop that are kind of getting a preview of the Rising Strong stuff here tonight, but they can attest it's a lot more in depth. It's a lot more work than what we're doing here tonight. But these are some of the other topics that we rumble through and help get you more clear about. And then we move into writing a brave new ending. So we need to identify the problem, and that's going to give us the clarity that we need in order to both solve that problem and then be able to feel more confident in other things that pop up in the future for us. You know, we can look at what's happening and start to disconnect from the stories that we're telling ourselves that aren't true, work through those emotions that are coming up around that. And once we do all that, we start to own our stories. We can write a brave new ending. And part of that's really integrating our learnings or knowledge that we've gained during that struggle. So the revolution, yay, right? So this is where the process becomes practice. Rumbling becomes a part of our everyday lives, allowing us to stay emotionally curious. I literally just like went through this process this week. My son had some difficulties at school, and we have a whole history with that. So like immediately my brain's like, oh, this is really bad. And it created this whole story about like what that's going to mean and all these things I needed to do. And it really was not nearly as bad as my brain made it out to be. I needed some more information from the teacher. And so I went through this whole thing. I'm like, where's this coming from? What does this remind me of? This brings up some old stuff. What story am I making up? What do I know for sure? What do I not know and need to get more information about? And now I feel like I'm in a much better place with it just within 3 days. So smaller stuff you can go through pretty quickly. And again, some of those bigger issues when it comes to relationships or trauma or things like that might take a little longer to untangle. But once you do this process, it's something that's going to come back to you and you're going to use again and again and again. Evolution is small incremental change, whereas revolution is defined as big tumultuous change. So you're going to see a massive difference when you start to apply this work in your everyday life, and living in your integrity absolutely changes your life and the life of those around you. So I think that's something to come back to of, am I showing up? And this is a Brené tagline, but I love all her stuff, but am I showing up? Am I living in a brave way? Am I actually being seen? And all that sound like, all her stuff sounds like a nice postcard, but to actually live into it's much harder. And I love the Daring Women community. If you're not a part of that, I absolutely would love to have you as part of the community. It's an open group, but that's really what that's about too, of like, how can I do some of this tough work with other people who are also in the arena, just getting their butts kicked and trying to figure out this thing called life and being real about it and not having to pretend like everything's fine all the time. We are stronger when we do things together. And I think this year has been really challenging for a lot of us because we felt so alone in it. So you don't have to do this alone. You don't have to do this work alone. You don't have to even do a Rising Strong workshop, but there is a community here, both with Daring Women. And I know there's so many other small groups that I've come across just since I started my own group that's out there, even if Daring Women isn't your thing, that you can find your people, you can connect to them, and you can start to be more of yourself. So these are some different ways that you can continue this work if this has been interesting for you. Obviously, the book Rising Strong kind of makes sense to go with that. But I will also be offering an intensive 2-day workshop. So it's kind of a half-day workshop. So it'll be about 4 hours on the morning of May 1st and May 15th. So if that's of interest to you, feel free to email me. I can send you some more information and get you signed up if you're interested. These are small groups, so they're limited between 4 to 6 participants. So everything you say in there is confidential. No, we're not going to video record anything like that. So we can really dive into some topics that are a lot tougher. If it seems more like something you want to do one-on-one, I have done this curriculum one-on-one before, and I can dive a lot deeper, and that's an 8-session deal with that. And then if you're interested in Daring Women, getting on the email list, we're doing our first in-person in a long time. It's super small, so there's only 2 more spots left. There's gonna be 5 of us, 5 plus me total for that. It's gonna be at the Carbondale Clay Center. We're gonna do something fun, but we're also gonna talk about the vulnerability of being creative and how we tend to go into comparison when we create, especially our pieces of artistic work. So if that's something you're interested in and meeting in person, we're going to follow all the COVID protocols, have the social distancing, masks, whole 9 yards, really small group. If that's uncomfortable, that's okay. We'll have some online offerings coming up as well. So let me know how I can help you stay connected, any of that stuff, and would love to open it up now for any thoughts or questions that you have. Let me stop that so I can see better. Okay. Okay, lots of thank you. So thanks for thanking me. I appreciate it. And thanks for taking time out of a busy week. The Clay Center, Valerie, is April 24th. It's from 12:30 to 2:30. So you can find it on Facebook, on Instagram, and then on Meetup, or if you have your email on my email list, you should be getting an email about that too. Sweet, Valerie wants to do it. Awesome. Well, this is very much just kind of getting your feet wet with this work, but hopefully it inspired you to get more curious about it, to learn more. And there's so much free Brené stuff out there. So listen to her podcast, just look her up on YouTube. It's all good stuff. What's the difference between Daring Greatly and Rising Strong? Daring Greatly talks a lot about shame and vulnerability and diving into those pieces. And it can actually be really great to do the Daring Greatly curriculum first and then do the Rising Strong curriculum, because they kind of build on each other. I would say Rising Strong is a lot more technique focused. So you will leave with a lot more like application pieces, but Daring Greatly really is like showing up, diving into our arena, the vulnerabilities that come with that, and starting to move out of any shame that we might have.
All right. Well, thank you, Ashley. This definitely was very enlightening for me, and I think a lot of us, everyone here tonight, a lot of information and tips that I know will take us, we'll try and implement and take us to the next level. So again, if you're interested in learning more about Ashley, please check out her work, daringwomenllc.com, or reach out to her email. She had that email. Do you want to say your email one more time?
Yeah, I'll type it in the message there, so that you can copy and paste it. So
all right, and I do just have a few more closing comments. In the chat, I'm going to place a few links. Since this was our first virtual workshop and fundraiser, we'd love to have your feedback. Maybe in the future, we might be able to do an in-person event that is something similar. So let's see, where's my chat? Okay. We also, I have to shout out to my fundraising committee volunteers helping put this together, and all of our sponsors being able to support us in our fundraising efforts. More ways to support. We do have a virtual silent auction going on. It's a selection of different themed gift baskets. The Active Soul, Glenwood Extreme, Roaring Fork Eats. Go on and 32auctions.com, voice for RBRC to check out and make your bid on one of those cool items. If you're able to donate, give a little more to our cause in Riverbridge, you can donate at coloradogives.org, Riverbridge Regional Center. And our next workshop is Friday night. We got a break tomorrow. Friday night, it is Ending the Week Right, yoga, find your voice within. So if you're interested, please go back online and you might purchase another ticket. I also do have free donated tickets as well. We have a lot of volunteers or supporters that have donated tickets. So if you're interested in one of those, please contact me. And if there's another class that you're interested in, please let me know and I'll get you up on that list. So thank you again, everyone, for coming this evening. And I hope to see you again at another workshop. Have a good night, everyone.